Hello, Joy family. Welcome to the Joyful House and welcome to Once Upon a Storybook. Today is Sunday, July the 13th, and we are continuing our Anne of Green Gables adventure with the third book, Anne of the Island. Today we will finish the last two chapters of this book. So if you're ready, come join me for an adventure as we read chapters 40, A Book of Revelation, and chapter 41, Love Takes Up the Glass of Time. So if you will, sit back, relax, and let's enjoy these two chapters. Chapter 40, A Book of Revelation. The Irvins came back to Echo Lodge for the summer, and Anne spent a happy 3 weeks there in July. Miss Lavender had not changed. Charlotta the Fourth was a very grown-up young lady now, but still adored Anne sincerely. "When all's said and done, Miss Shirley, ma'am, I haven't seen anyone in Boston that equals to you," she said frankly. Paul was almost grown up too. He was 16. His chestnut curls had given place to close-cropped brown locks, and he was more interested in football than fairies. But the bond between him and his old teacher still held. Kindred spirits alone do not change with changing years. It was a wet, bleak, cruel evening in July when Anne came back to Green Gables. One of the fierce summer storms which sometimes sweeps over the Gulf was ravaging the sea. As Anne came in, the first raindrops dashed against the panes. "Was that Paul who brought you home?" asked Marilla. "Why didn't you make him stay all night? It's going to be a wild evening." "He'll reach Echo Lodge before the rain gets very heavy, I think. Anyway, he wanted to go back tonight." "Well, I've had a splendid visit, but I'm glad to see you dear folks again. East, west, home's best. Davy, have you been growing again lately?" "I've growed a whole inch since you left," said Davy proudly. "I'm as tall as Milty Boulter now. Ain't I glad? He'll have to stop crowing about being bigger. Say, Anne, did you know that Gilbert Blythe is dying?" Anne stood quiet, silent, and motionless, looking at Davy. Her face had gone so white that Marilla thought she was going to faint. "Davy, hold your tongue," said Miss Rachel angrily. "Anne, don't look like that. Anne, don't look like that. We didn't mean to tell you so suddenly. Is it true?" asked Anne in a voice that was not hers. "Gilbert is very ill," said Miss Lynde gravely. "He took down with typhoid fever just after you left for Echo Lodge. Did you never hear of it?" "No," said that unknown voice. "It was a very bad case from the start. The doctor said he'd been terribly run down. They've a trained nurse and everything's been done. Don't look like that, Anne. While there's life, there's hope. Mr. Harrison was here this evening and he said they had no hope of him," reiterated Davy. Marilla, looking old and worn and tired, got up and marched Davy grimly out of the kitchen. "Oh, don't look so, dear," said Miss Rachel, putting her kind old arms around the pallid girl. "I haven't given up hope. Indeed, I haven't. He's got that Blythe constitution in his favor. That's what." Anne gently put Miss Lynde's arms away from her, walked blindly across the kitchen, through the hall, up the stairs to her old room. At its window she knelt down, staring out unseeingly. It was very dark. The rain was beating down over the shivering fields. The haunted wood was full of the groans of mighty trees wrung in the tempest, and the air throbbed with the thunderous crash of billows on the distant shore. And Gilbert was dying. There's a book of Revelation in everyone's life as there is in the Bible. Anne read hers that bitter night, as she kept her agonized vigil through the hours of storm and darkness. She loved Gilbert, had always loved him. She knew that now. She knew that she could no more cast him out of her life without agony than she could have cut off her right hand and cast it from her. And the knowledge had come too late even for the bitter solace of being with him at the last. If she had not been so blind, so foolish, she would have the right to go to him now. But he would never know that she loved him. He would go away from this life thinking that she did not care. Oh, the black years of emptiness stretching before her. She could not live through them. She could not. She cowered down by her window and wished for the first time in her gay young life that she would die. If Gilbert went away from her without one word, a sign, or message, she would not live. Nothing was of any value without him. She belonged to him and he to her. In her hour of supreme agony, she had no doubt of that. He did not love Christine Stuart. Never had loved Christine Stuart. Oh, what a fool she'd been not to realize what the bond was that had held her to Gilbert. To think that the flattered fancy she had felt for Roy Gardner had been love, and now she must pay for her folly, as for a crime. Miss Lind and Marilla crept to her door before they went to bed, shook their heads doubtfully at each other over the silence, and went away. The storm raged all night, but when the dawn came, it was spent. Anne saw a fairy fringe of light on the skirts of darkness. Soon the eastern hilltops had a fire-shot ruby rim. The clouds rolled themselves away into great, soft, white masses on the horizon. The sky gleamed blue and silvery. A hush fell over the world. Anne rose from her knees and crept downstairs. The freshness of the rain wind blew against her white face as she went out into the yard and cooled her dry, burning eyes. A merry, rollicking whistle was lifting up the lane, and a moment later, Pacifique Butte came in sight. Anne's physical strength suddenly failed her. If she had not clutched at a low willow bough, she would have fallen. Pacifique was George Fletcher's hired man, and George Fletcher lived next door to the Blythes. Miss Fletcher was Gilbert's aunt. Pacifique would know if Pacifique would know what there was to be known. Pacifique strode sturdily on along the red lane, whistling. He did not see Anne. She made 3 futile attempts to call him. He was almost past her before she succeeded in making her quivering lips call, "Pacifique!" Pacifique turned with a grin and cheerful good morning. "Pacifique," said Anne faintly, "did you come from George Fletcher's this morning?" "Sure," said Pacifique amiably. "I got the word last night that my father, he was sick. It was so stormy that I didn't go in, so I started there early this morning. I'm going through the woods for shortcut." "Did you hear how Gilbert Blythe was this morning?" Anne's desperation drove her to the question. Even the worst would be more endurable than this hideous suspense. "He's better," said Pacifique. "He got the turn last night. The doctor say he'll be all right now this soon while. Had close shave, though. That boy, he just killed himself at college. Well, I must hurry. The old man, he'll be in a hurry to see me." Pacifique resumed his walk and his whistle. Anne gazed after him with eyes where joy was driving out the strained anguish of the night. He was a very lank, very ragged, very homely youth, but in her sight he was as beautiful as those who bring good tidings on the mountains. Never, as long as she lived, would Anne see Pacifique's brown, round, black-eyed face without a warm remembrance of the moment when he had given her the oil of joy for mourning. Excuse me. Long after Pacifique's gay whistle had faded into the phantom of music and then into silence far under the maples of Lover's Lane, Anne stood under the willows, tasting the poignant sweetness of life when some great dread has been removed from it. The morning was a cup filled with mist and glamour. In the corner near her was a rich surprise of new-blown crystal-dewed roses. The thrills and trickles of song from the birds in the big trees above her seemed in perfect accord with her mood. A sentence from a very old, very true, very wonderful book came to her lips. Weeping may endure for a night, but joy cometh in the morning. Well, y'all know I love that. All right, chapter 41. Love takes up the glass of time. Excuse me. I've come up to ask you to go for one of our old-time rambles through September woods and over hills where spices grow this afternoon, said Gilbert, coming suddenly around the porch corner. Suppose we visit Hester Gray's garden. Anne, sitting on the stone step with her lap full of a pale, filmy green stuff, looked up rather blankly. Oh, I wish I could, she said slowly. But I really can't, Gilbert. I'm going to Alice Penhallow's wedding this evening, you know. I've got to do something to this dress, and by the time it's finished, I'll have to get ready. I'm so sorry. I'd love to go. Well, can you go tomorrow afternoon then? Asked Gilbert, apparently not much disappointed. Yes, I think so. In that case, I shall hie me home at once to do something I should otherwise have to do tomorrow. So Alice Penhallow is to be married tonight. 3 weddings for you in one summer, Anne. Phil's, Alice's, and Jane's. I'll never forgive Jane for not inviting me to her wedding. You really can't blame her when you think of the tremendous Andrews connection who had to be invited. The house could hardly hold them all. I was only bidden by grace of being Jane's old chum, at least on Jane's part. I think Miss Harmon's motive for inviting me was to let me see Jane's surpassing gorgeousness. Is it true that she wore so many diamonds that you couldn't tell where the diamonds left off and Jane began? Anne laughed. She certainly wore a good many. What with all the diamonds and white satin and tulle and lace and roses and orange blossoms, prim little Jane was almost lost to sight. But she was very happy, and so was Mr. Inglis, and so was Mrs. Harmon. Is that the dress you're going to wear tonight? Asked Gilbert, looking down at the fluffs and the frills. Yes, isn't it pretty? And I shall wear starflowers in my hair. The haunted wood is full of them this summer. Gilbert had a sudden vision of Anne, arrayed in frilly green gown, with the virginal curves of arms and throat slipping out of it, and white stars shining against the coils of her ruddy hair. The vision made him catch his breath, but he turned lightly away. Well, I'll be up tomorrow. Hope you'll have a nice time tonight. Anne looked after him as he strode away and sighed. Gilbert was friendly, very friendly, far too friendly. He had come quite often to Green Gables after his recovery, and something of their old comradeship had returned, but Anne no longer found it satisfying. The rose of love made the blossom of friendship pale and scentless by contrast, and Anne had begun to doubt if Gilbert now felt anything for her but friendship. In the common light of common day, her radiant certainty of that rapt morning had faded. She was haunted by a miserable fear that her mistake could never be rectified. It was quite likely that it was Christine whom Gilbert loved after all. Perhaps he was even engaged to her. Anne tried to put all unsettling hopes out of her heart and reconcile herself to a future where work and ambition must take the place of love. She could do good, if not noble, work as a teacher. And the success her little sketches were beginning to meet with in certain editorial sanctums augured well for her boding literary dreams. But, Anne picked up her green dress and sighed again. When Gilbert came the next afternoon, he found Anne waiting for him, fresh as the dawn and fair as a star. After all the gaiety of the preceding night, she wore a green dress, not the one she had worn to the wedding, but an old one which Gilbert had told her at a Redmond reception he liked especially. It was just the shade of green that brought out the rich tints of her hair, and the starry gray of her eyes, and the iris-like delicacy of her skin. Gilbert, glancing at her sideways as they walked along a shadowy wood path, thought she had never looked so lovely. Anne, glancing sideways at Gilbert now and then, thought how much older he looked since his illness. It was as if he had put boyhood behind him forever. The day was beautiful and the way was beautiful. Anne was almost sorry when they reached Hester Gray's garden and sat down on the old bench. But it was so beautiful there, as beautiful as it had been on the faraway day of the golden picnic, when Diana and Jane and Priscilla and she had found it. Then it had been lovely with narcissus and violets. Now goldenrod had kindled its fairy torches in the corners and asters dotted it bluely. The call of the brook came up through the woods from the valley of birches with all its old allurement. The mellow air was full of the purr of the sea. Beyond, where fields rimmed by fences bleached silvery gray in the suns of many summers, and long hills scarfed with the shadows of autumnal clouds, with the blowing of the west wind, old dreams returned. "I think," said Anne softly, "that the land where dreams come true is in the blue haze yonder, over that little valley." "Have you any unfulfilled dreams, Anne?" asked Gilbert. Something in his tone, something she had not heard since that miserable evening in the orchard at Patty's place, made Anne's heart beat wildly. But she made answer lightly. "Of course. Everybody has. It wouldn't do for us to have all our dreams fulfilled. We would be as good as dead if we had nothing left to dream about. What a delicious aroma that low descending sun is extracting from the asters and ferns. I wish we could see perfumes as well as smell them. I'm sure they would be very beautiful." Gilbert was not to be thus sidetracked. "I have a dream," he said slowly. "I persist in dreaming it, although it has often seemed to me that it could never come true. I dream of a home with a hearth fire in it, a cat and a dog, the footsteps of friends, and you." Anne wanted to speak, but she could find no words. Happiness was breaking over her like a wave. It almost frightened her. "I asked you a question over 2 years ago, Anne. If I ask it again today, will you give me a different answer?" Still, Anne could not speak. But she lifted her eyes, shining with all the love rapture of countless generations, and looked into his for a moment. He wanted no other answer. They lingered in the old garden until twilight, sweet as dusk in Eden must have been, crept over it. There was so much to talk over and recall, things said and done and heard and thought and felt and misunderstood. "I thought you loved Christine Stuart," Anne told him, as reproachfully as if she had not given him every reason to suppose that she loved Roy Gardner. Gilbert laughed boyishly. "Christine was engaged to somebody in her hometown. I knew it, and she knew I knew it. When her brother graduated, he told me his sister was coming to Kingsport the next winter to take music, and asked me if I would look after her a bit, and she knew no one and would be very lonely. So I did. And then I liked Christine for her own sake. She is one of the nicest girls I've ever known. I knew college gossip credited us with being in love with each other. I didn't care. Nothing mattered much to me for a time there after you told me you should never love me, Anne. There was nobody else. There never could be anybody else. For me. But you. I've loved you ever since that day you broke your slate over my head in school. I don't see how you could keep on loving me when I was such a little fool," said Anne. "Well, I tried to stop," said Gilbert frankly. Not because I thought you what you call yourself, but because I felt sure there was no chance for me after Gardner came on the scene. But I couldn't, and I can't tell you either what it's meant to me these 2 years to believe you were going to marry him, and be told every week by some busybody that your engagement was on the point of being announced. I believed it until one blessed day when I was sitting up after the fever. I got a letter from Phil Blake rather. in which she told me there was really nothing between you and Roy and advised me to try again. Well, the doctor was amazed at my rapid recovery after that. Anne laughed, then shivered. I can never forget the night I thought you were dying, Gilbert. Oh, I knew then, and I thought it was too late. But it wasn't, sweetheart. Oh, Anne, this makes up for everything, doesn't it? Let's resolve to keep this day sacred to perfect beauty all our lives for the gift it has given us. It's the birthday of our happiness, said Anne softly. I've always loved this old garden of Hester Gray's, and now it will be dearer than ever. But I'll have to ask you to wait a long time, Anne, said Gilbert sadly. It will be 3 years before I finish any medical course, and even then there will be no diamond sunburst and marble halls. Anne laughed. I don't want sunburst and marble halls. I just want you. You see, I'm quite as shameless as Phil about it. Sunburst and marble halls may all be very well, but there's more scope for imagination without them. And as for the waiting, that doesn't matter. We'll just be happy, waiting and working for each other, and dreaming. Oh, dreams will be very sweet now. Gilbert drew her close to him and kissed her. Then they walked home together in the dusk, crowned king and queen in the bridal realm of love, along winding paths fringed with the sweetest flowers that ever bloom, and over haunted meadows where winds of hope and memory blew. About time! Oh my gosh! What a way to end this book. Now I'm even more excited about starting the 4th book. So before we head out today, at the back of this book, there is a biography of L.M. Montgomery, and it's written by Caroline Perry, and I thought we would read it. So here we go. I love books. I hope when I grow up to be able to have lots of them, Lucy Maud Montgomery wrote in her journal when she was just 14. This journal entry made in 1889, is significant to readers today who know that when she grew up, she not only owned and read many books, but also became the world-famous author L.M. Montgomery. Maud, as she liked to be called by family and friends, wrote 24 books between 1908 and 1939. Her first was Anne of Green Gables, and her other works include 7 more Anne books, the Avonlea series, the Emily trilogy, 2 novels for adults, an autobiography, and the novel The Story Girl. Lucy Maud Montgomery was also writing and reading and was quite a story girl herself, creating more than 500 short stories. She also wrote many poems. One edition of her poetry was published during her lifetime, and today all of her poems have been collected in a single volume. Ellen Montgomery's favorite among her own work was The Story Girl, a novel about a young spinner of tales. What makes a person a story girl? Looking at the life of Montgomery, it seems clear that being born on beautiful Prince Edward Island, Canada, inspired her. Having a literary family also fueled Montgomery's writing, but most important, she was simply full of stories, just like the characters she created. Her beloved redhead Anne, the autobiographical Emily of the Emily trilogy, and Sarah, the central storyteller of The Story Girl. In The Alpine Path, the story of my career, Montgomery wrote, I cannot remember the time when I was not writing, or when I did not mean to be a writer. I was an indefatigable little scribbler. Later, she added, 9 out of 10 manuscripts came back to me, but I sent them out over and over again. She pursued her goals as a writer in a remarkably focused way. Besides her literary endeavors, Montgomery wrote many letters. She and a childhood friend even wrote some letters to themselves to be opened 10 years later. As an adult, Montgomery wrote extensive letters to 2 pen pals, which were published in 1960 and 1980 as the Green Gables Letters from L.M. Montgomery to Ephraim Weber, 1905 to 1909. And My Dear Mr. Macmillan, letters to G.B. Macmillan from L.M. Montgomery. Besides her personal letters, Montgomery made entry upon entry in what would become 10 volumes of personal journals. She wrote, Saturday, September 21st, 1889. I'm going to begin a new kind of diary. I've kept one of a kind for years, ever since I was a tot of 9. But I burned it today. It was so silly, I was ashamed of it. But I'm going to start over all new and write only when I have something worth writing about. Life is beginning to get interesting for me. I will soon be 15, the last day of November. And in this journal, I'm never going to tell what kind of day it is unless the weather has something to do worthwhile. And last, but not least, I'm going to keep this book locked up. She found much worth writing about the journals run to more than 5,000 pages, discussing everything from geraniums with names to village gossip. From marriage proposals to great soul aches, Montgomery continued these habits for most of her life, except during a period at the beginning of World War II, when she was too depressed to make her daily entries. 3 volumes of her journals have been published, with other collections still to come. In January 1904, when she was almost 30, Montgomery wrote, Only lonely people keep diaries. For all her rich friendships, Ellen Montgomery was a lonely person. After her mother died of tuberculosis in 1876, her father relocated west, leaving Maud behind, and married again. Young Maud, who was not yet 2 years old, was largely brought up by her mother's parents. That side of her family gave her a love of literature. For the lonely girl, books were important friends. Although she did have cousins and schoolmates for company, she had no siblings, and she had no neighborhood playmates until she was 8. But being sensitive and imaginative, she had 2 bookcase window companions. Very much like Anne Shirley's Katie Maurice, and just like Anne, Maud named her favorite trees and plants, speaking to them as if they were friends. As the years passed, Montgomery's journals became her best friend. She called them a personal confidant in whom I can repose absolute trust. This was especially true during turbulent periods. In 1889, she traveled to Alberta to live for a year with her father and his second wife. Maud hated Miss Montgomery, confiding, I cannot call her anything else except before others for father's sake. Mother's love for her father helped her survive her stay. Maud's love for her father helped her survive her stay, as did being able to record her complaints in her journal. But she also had cause to celebrate in its pages. During that year, the first of her writings was published in the Charlottetown Patriot. She wrote on December 7th, 1890, Well, this has really been the proudest day of my life. There is one of the columns, was my poem. In 1891, Montgomery returned to Prince Edward Island to finish her education, and after a year in college and a stint as a journalist, she began work as a teacher. During that time, her love life became very tangled. While teaching at a school in Lower Baduke, I may not be saying that right, she boarded with Mr. and Mrs. Cornelius Lurd. She soon became romantically involved with their son, Herman, much to her own dismay. Not only was she already engaged to her second cousin, Edwin Simpson, but she felt that Herman, an uneducated farmer, was not at all a suitable match for her. She had realized shortly after accepting Edwin Simpson's proposal that she did not love him. But breaking an engagement was a serious affair in her day, and she had not yet been able to end their relationship. Now she was tormented by her feelings for the 2 men. When Edwin Simpson arrived in Lower Baduke for an impromptu Christmas visit, Montgomery described the scene in her journal. There I was under the same roof with 2 men, one of whom I loved and could never marry, the other whom I had promised to marry but could never love. What I suffered that night between horror, shame, and dread can never be told. Despite her inner turmoil during this period, she never stopped writing in 12 months between 1897 and 1898. She saw 19 of her short stories and 14 of her poems in print. Her involvement with Herman Lurd ended when she returned to Prince Edward Island after her grandfather's death in March 1898, and she broke off her engagement to Edwin Simpson a short time later. She remained on Prince Edward Island and became her grandmother's dutiful housekeeper and companion, carrying that heavy responsibility for 9 years. In 1906, she became engaged to a minister named Ewan MacDonald, with the understanding that they would not be married until her obligation to her grandmother was fulfilled. She did not love MacDonald with any passion, but she respected him, and he was a more suitable match for her than any of her previous suitors. During their courtship, she began to write Anne of Green Gables, her first novel. When the book finally found a publisher, it became an almost instant success, selling more than 19,000 copies in 5 months. Surprised and delighted, Montgomery quickly completed a sequel. Little did she know that she would continue writing stories about her spirited heroine, Anne Shirley, until 1939. After her grandmother's death in 1911, Montgomery was finally free to marry Ewan MacDonald. They honeymooned in Great Britain, and then Montgomery accompanied her husband to his church in Ontario. They had 3 sons, one of whom sadly died at birth. From this period on, Montgomery always had 2 major roles to play: that of the internationally known writer and that of the wife, mother, and community figurehead. Always juggling her duties and her creative work, she found satisfaction and joy in those years, but also great frustration as she strove to perform both roles successfully. Neighbors grew used to seeing the petite Miss MacDonald, as they called her, striding down the street to take care of shopping or Sunday school, muttering dialogue for her books as she went. In her lifetime, Montgomery endured many strains: the horror of World War I, her husband's severe depression, and deteriorating relations with her first publisher. But she kept up appearances both as a minister's wife and as an author. Immensely productive both domestically and professionally, she maintained a daily routine of writing stories, poems, and letters, and personally replied to all of her fan mail. She continued to pour out her problems and the agonies of her inner life in her journal. She found the advent of World War II particularly horrible. Finally, her days became so difficult that even her friendly old journal failed her. Sad and bitter, having neither written to her pen friends nor unburdened herself in her journals for months, she died in 1942. After her death, Montgomery's ambition to write a book that will live was fulfilled many times over, particularly through the Anne books. Anne of Green Gables has sold millions of copies and has been translated into 17 languages. Wow. Anne has also taken to the stage and screen, inspiring a musical and a ballad, as well as numerous films and several television miniseries. Ironically, despite the great popularity of all her books, Ellen Montgomery was ignored by the critics after the 1920s and was not recognized as a significant Canadian writer until the 1970s. At that time, scholars interested in female writers began to examine why people so enjoyed reading about Anne and Emily, as well as the other marvelous personalities Montgomery created. They questioned why a woman writer, whom a poll in 1947 showed to be almost as beloved as Charles Dickens, had been pushed to the sidelines of literature. At last, Lucy Maud Montgomery's journals came to be seen as important resources for understanding both her own complex character and the characters that she brought to life in her books. Thanks to Ellen Montgomery's energy and genius, the people in her writing live on, especially the fiery, tempered Anne. The spirited independence of the small, red-headed heroine has endeared her to readers everywhere. Montgomery's keen sense of both beauty and justice embodied in Anne and all her other heroines, has encouraged young people around the world. Well, how cool was that? So that was a nice little glimpse and tribute into Lucy Maud, as her friends and family called her, Montgomery's life. Well, thank you for joining me. I hope you enjoy the rest of your Sunday afternoon, and I look forward to seeing you for our next storybook adventure. And until then, be joyful and be the joy in everything you do. Nugs and joy. Mwah. Love you. God bless.